Today, our guest is Megan O'Brien, and she is a historian and an educator who has been making trips to the lands that she teaches about to her middle school students, which is just about my speed for understanding history in the real world. And so today we're going to talk about history rhymes, how what happened then doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and how what that means for the survival of the species and for how it is that women contribute to resistance to live and fight another day. Please welcome Megan to our podcast. So, Meg, I
Yes.
am so thrilled to see you here. And I first heard you speak last year at a church. And I have never given two shakes about history until I heard you. And the
Thank you.
fact that you made it sixth grade level was about where I dropped off on
Yeah.
history as a kid. And so it was really fascinating. You had just come back from a trip to Israel at that point, and
Yep.
you were trying to condense it for an adult audience in a 2 hour
Hmm.
time frame. And what I heard were two things. I heard the power of place,
Yep.
because what I know from doing these podcasts for a while with historians is that who matters who tells the story.
Hmm.
The lens is different
Yep.
through every look. So as you continue your path of learning and growing and traveling and developing and figuring out how to translate it to folks like me and your sixth graders,
Yeah.
the other thing you said was that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
Hmm.
And I have shared that with people on podcasts ever since, and every one of them is like, "Oh, that's so
Yeah.
true."
Yeah.
So today I want to talk about history
Mhm.
rhymes based on whatever it is, wherever the conversation goes,
Okay.
and how that intersects with us today in our culture and our
Yeah.
trajectory.
Happy to.
Tell us about yourself. What would you like us to know?
So from the introduction, I am a middle school teacher. I've been here for about 10 years. Went to school here, and I have had a love of history since I was a little kid. My dad was a history teacher. My mom taught elementary school, but was also very into, learning, and we would do history trips. And so I think even as a small child, I was learning like the power of place by going to different sites and following my parents around. And in my classroom, I think it's really important for kids to be able to relate and have a connection. And so as a teacher, I find that it's really important for me to constantly learn. If I'm asking my kids to learn and study and take notes and read, I need to be doing that too. I need to be modeling that for them. And I think they appreciate it. In many of my classes, I currently teach seventh grade and ninth grade. And I teach US history and world history. I've taught eighth grade US history. But the one thing the kids I think find value in is when I am able to share in the classroom my experiences that I've done through professional development, be it my trip this past summer, which I was able to bring back to the classroom. I've done a lot of civil rights trips, which I then bring into the classroom. And not only can I share personal stories and experiences, but I can bring photos back. I can bring videos back. I've made a lot of connections with colleagues. My trip this past summer, I had a colleague whose family, died at Auschwitz. They were murdered at Auschwitz. And so she actually zoomed in and had a conversation with the kids. So it broadens their understanding. And I think it's important to also find ways for kids to relate to certain things. To me, history, yes, is dates and, the facts, but I think it's important for them to see perspectives of teenagers in these moments and children and women and marginalized voices, because the kids can then have that connection. So to me, that's how I need to teach.
And so for me, I experience things in my body before my brain even makes sense of it. I went to a Women Advancing Racial Equity 2.5 years ago. And when she asked the question, what has racism cost you as a white woman?
Hmm.
When I got that, I got it in my gut,
Hmm. Yep.
which fueled
Yeah.
the coming up on 100th
Yeah.
episode that you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And I did that to keep me in place. I did
Hmm.
this podcast to keep me from going back to my white bubble of
Hmm.
privilege and
Yep.
not having to look at that right now.
Yep. Yeah.
And it turned out to be fortuitous as our evolution and as our
Yep.
history is happening,
Yep.
because the connections are so tight. And
Hmm.
what moves women in times of resistance
Hmm.
or devaluation, it's
Yep.
when something happens to someone close to them or someone they love.
Hmm.
It moves them in ways nothing else can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I agree with all that. Like my first civil rights trip was with a group, and I would suggest any of your listeners to go on their website. It's called Common Power.
Mhm.
And they started, and they still do work, but it's about getting the vote out and how, your rights as voters and what you should be doing. And then they did a sub branch called the Institute for Common Power, and that is specifically for educators, but they've built it. They now bring doctors and nurses down on medical trips to learn about, the racial history in the South using Black bodies for experimentation and learning about that. And so I went on my first trip with the Institute, and Dr. Terry Ann Scott, who's a phenomenal, African American historian. We went to where the ships came in the Montgomery Harbor, and we walked up, and it's a very intentional, and it's, we were a multiracial group. And she said, for me, like, let's debrief. What are we all thinking? What are we all feeling? And my colleagues, like, and Terry saying, Dr. Scott saying, for me as a Black woman, I'm thinking I've got kids, and my children would have walked up here with me and been ripped from my arms. As a white woman, I can't relate to that. And I know I can't relate to that, but I think it's important for me to be an ally and a true ally. I think there can be,
Talk about that.
I think people can say they are an ally when it's easy, in all
Yeah.
honesty. And I think it's saying, yes, I support Black lives, and that's wonderful. But what are you actually doing to do the work, to
Mhm.
stand up, to, stand next to your, Black friends if they are in a moment that they are being, attacked. And I don't think people always do that. I think, it's scary. It's very scary. Even again, I'll go back to these trips. We went to many sites, especially when we went to Mississippi. I went on a second trip, and there were many sites that I'm getting goosebumps where we knew that people were not happy that this was a group who was coming in, and not only were they going to these sites that are honored by, I would say, lost cause,
Mhm.
and racist, and
Mhm.
viewed as these, sacred locations for them because of what happened during the civil rights movement, usually resulting in the death of individuals.
Mhm.
Um, and they don't like seeing that I'm a white woman and I'm standing next to a Black man, and
Mhm.
we're there together. And there were times that we would be at a site, and the same car would drive back and forth. We'd be at another site. We went to one site, and a car actually pulled up. It was in Money, Mississippi, where Emmett Till was murdered. Um, and this car just idled. It was a big truck,
Wow.
and you could see, Dr. Scott was sort of like, let's get a little bit closer. It's a very rural area. And I've been on many trips, many, many, many trips. Um, and when we went to Mississippi, that was the first time I've ever done professional development where ahead of time there was a conversation we had as a group of, they were actually debating, do they bring a bodyguard with us down there? It was going to be, it was last year. It was going to be when the inauguration was happening.
Yeah.
And they were concerned of what is this going to look like? And do we have a bodyguard, in Mississippi? Do we, what do we actually do? And I've talked to my parents, and my mom has said, it's funny, I don't feel nervous when you've gone off to Europe. But when you did go down to Mississippi, there was this concern. And so I think that's the difference of being, an ally who is more just the words, and then an ally who's actually taking the action.
Right. And how do you, what happens in your body? How do you regulate when the fear factor that is real?
Yeah.
It's not manufactured here. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is we all sort of, get these looks of like, what should we do? Should we get and I mean, we always feel safe because we know Dr. Scott and David Domke, who is her, teaching partner, they would never put us in a site that we would actually,
Yeah.
have major concerns. But the fact that you do in certain areas now, still in America, have to have, that saying eyes in the back of your head. And, in those moments, it was sort of like, I'm a little nervous. And when we were down this past or last February in Philadelphia, and yeah, Philadelphia, Mississippi, um, and there was a lovely gentleman. But he kept coming and like finding our group. Like we met him
Yeah.
and he sort of was like, "Oh, what happened here wasn't that bad. I grew up here." And so we were being very polite. And that's the big thing. Like Dr. Scott never goes in and says, "We don't agree with you." It
Right.
is, have you thought about this, right? Have you thought in the Alabama state capitol, have you thought that still having paintings where it's depicting slavery as being this wonderful thing might impact the kids coming in here who see that every day? And so there's never any judgment. It is more like, have we thought about this? Have you thought about the perspective? And we met, so he was a very nice guy. He brought us in. He was a pastor, and so he was like, I can make you coffee. And but we all still were like, is there ulterior motive behind this? And then we took our bus and we went somewhere else, and all of a sudden he was there too. And the bus, all of us were sort of like, is he following us? Is he talking to other people?
Oof.
Is there this buses around our and just kind of keep an eye on it. And I think that's still very real down there. And but there's also this sense of like I'm in it with my and they've now become my friends. I'm in it with them. And and this was said when we were on the Zoom before we went to Mississippi, one of my colleagues and friends, said, I live my life like this, and they're Black, and I live my life like this. And so my thing was, if they live this every day, I could
Mhm.
go down and live this for the 5 days that we're there
Yeah.
and support that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that little taste for people with our skin color,
Yep.
that little taste is a gut punch
Hmm.
of
Yep.
reality.
Yep. Yep.
A friend of ours gave us a game for Christmas, a
Hmm.
game
Yeah.
called Black Wall Street. And it
Hmm.
is historical version of Monopoly.
Yeah.
Great, highly recommend.
Yeah.
Started playing it with our granddaughter who's 11.
Yeah.
We've now played it 3 times.
Yeah.
And I'm writing a whole series about that experience
Hmm.
because it shifted who I am and how I move in this world.
Yeah.
There's one card in the game that says the Tulsa Massacre
Hmm.
and talks about it, and it wipes out everybody equally across the
Hmm.
board. And
Yeah.
you have to decide what you're going to be. Well, the first time that happened, I got a little, well, well, that's not fair. Well,
Yeah.
I wasn't very far in the game, so it was
Yeah.
okay
Yeah.
to start over and
Yeah.
try
Yeah.
again. But I didn't go out, but I went out with more caution.
Hmm.
I wasn't spending my money willy-nilly like I was
Hmm.
the first time through.
Yep.
The next time we played the game, because she loved it so much, I'm still the banker. We played the game the second time she was over, and we got that stupid card midway through the game. And it was a gut punch of defeat. It was like,
Yeah.
oh, and I didn't realize until the third time we played that my brain is trying to figure out ways to win this thing.
Hmm.
So by
Hmm.
the third time, I started out all in and I bought all the properties and I did all the things and I
Yeah.
got a monopoly and I built their version of hotels and I spent every penny I had. We were like 4 cards from the end of the game, right? We had played it a long time,
Yeah.
a couple hours, and that stupid card, the Tulsa Massacre
Hmm.
card, came up. So we're teaching history, we're teaching
Yeah.
finance, we're teaching business strategy to
Yep.
this child. It's awesome. But when that card came up, I I was mad.
Yeah.
I had just spent everything I had. So when we got wiped out, I didn't have enough cash flow to even go around the board and try one
Hmm.
more time. It
Hmm.
was horribly defeated. And we talked about how these were real historical happenings.
Yep.
If I'm feeling that over a game,
Hmm.
what would it have been like to have lived it?
Yep.
What happens to the generations and the DNA of our offspring
Hmm.
when we have learned that defeatist
Hmm.
lesson?
Hmm.
Not for no reason, not
Yep.
because we're lazy, because we will persist as a species no
Yep.
matter.
Yep.
And the difference between what I saw in that game and what I see happening in real life now is that white women, we don't have centuries of persist
Yeah.
no matter.
Yep.
And the black women do, and
Yep.
they have waited for us to catch up.
Hmm.
The
Yep.
work you're doing, you are in real time moving yourself from ally to advocate to
Hmm.
accomplice to activist.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's what I try to do in my little corner of the world. But the stories,
Yeah.
the lived experience, the place
Yep.
matter.
Yeah. And that's, you bring up that game, and I've written it down so I can pick it up. Um, one of my favorite things to do, and so ninth grade is world history, so I haven't taught US history in about 2 years when it covers the civil rights and everything. But one of my favorite things to do was to bring the kids in, and I said, we're having a quiz. And I give them, the quiz, and it is the Louisiana State literacy test. And so I say, okay, and they had 10 minutes to do it, but normally I cut it down just for class so we can have discussion. And so I say, okay, and I put a clock up and I say, you've got 5 minutes to do it. And I said, you can't talk, you can't, pick up your pencil, everything off your desk. And so they're getting nervous and they start doing it. And they flip it over and they start reading it and they're like, well, this doesn't. And I'm like, you spoke, you put the pencil down, you failed. And then usually about 2 minutes into it, I will say, if your name begins with the letter M, good job, you've passed, you're done for the. And so the kids start getting, and then we finish it and we have this discussion about, what was voting rights left like, what was put into place so people couldn't vote, or to make them feel like I'm so defeated, I'm not going to keep doing it. The conversations of going and voting, and then knowing that your name's going to be put in the newspaper and you're going to lose your job. We talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, who went in to do it, and by the time she got home, she had found out that she was being evicted from her home. And so that's another thing where, again, the kids are learning. And so they're taking history, but they're getting angry. Like they're like, but that's not fair. And I'm like, it's not about being fair, and even if someone did, because they say, what if let's say someone had passed. And I said, well, again, I am the woman, or the white, usually white man, who's giving the test. And if I tell you that I wanted you to actually spell your name in cursive, you can
Mhm.
fail. If people passed, they would then say, okay, well, here's a bonus question you have to answer. How many windows are in the White House? Or, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? And it does spark this whole, to the point where the kids are like, can we retake the test? Can we try it again? And I'm like, well, you can, but you're still, it's set up so you fail. And I did say, I'm very clear with the kids, yes, this is specifically for members of the Black community, but it was also set in place sometimes for members of the white community who were poor.
Yeah.
It's not, there's a very good book, and I can't remember the name of it. I think it's We Were Your Children Too. And it has to do with segregation in Virginia.
Mhm.
And it talks about how this community was so adamant that they did not want the school to segregate, that they basically started a private school. So
Mhm.
only the white kids could attend it. And it was about 3 or 4 years of no school for poor whites and Black students. And there was this huge gap in their education. And it caused this shame, not only for the Blacks, but also for the poor white. And, so I also bring that up with the kids as well, of yes, as white people, we didn't have it as bad in any sense of the means, but there were these things that were put into place that, were for the rich whites. And if it ended up making, poor whites in the community also lose their education, and also it didn't matter to them.
Mhm.
And so we sort of have those. And I think it's important to bring that to the students, because I will get students that are like, it wasn't that bad, it wasn't. But then when you start bringing in this hook of like, but it also was impacting the white family members who might not have had money, then they're like, well, wait a minute, now why? And then you can continue that conversation of like, it was bad for the poor whites, but it was even worse, and that gets them talking a little bit more. Because I do think sometimes you get students that are like, oh, here we go again. And it's
Mhm.
a way to kind of find, I feel like, them seeing that, Miss O'Brien isn't just being biased, right? Like she is bringing these different feeds into it.
Yeah. Well, and I think the experiential aspect of exercises that make you look at things differently. When I was in Louisville at Dr. Nikki Lanier's conference 2.5 years ago, and the first thing they did was brought out all of the policies, the historical policies of the United States
Hmm.
that were not applied evenly
Hmm.
across the board, and what that did to generational wealth and to
Hmm.
trajectory in society and to redlining and
Hmm.
all the things. And it was the part about the GI Bill
Hmm.
that was not that. So I have children. Their father was a disabled veteran.
Yep.
They benefited into adulthood from
Hmm.
the education they were able to get, not because
Hmm.
we had means to give it to them, but because of the
Right.
benefits of that.
Right.
And I assumed every veteran had the same
Hmm.
benefit.
Right.
And when I learned, just like Social Security, where
Hmm.
they pulled out except for farm labor and domestic help,
Hmm.
what that does to the generations.
Hmm.
I felt it in a way I can't unfeel
Yeah.
it, which means I never look at it the same.
Hmm.
But you can talk that stuff to people all day long.
Right.
But until you have some little exercise that hits your solar plexus,
Hmm.
and that's the power of place.
Yep.
And so when you do these things and you bring place to the people, instead of trying to bring people to the place, which is a
Hmm.
much more elite
Yep.
status,
Yep.
it's a gift you have.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's why I feel like, and I know I have, the privilege to be able to go and do these things. It's not everyone can do it. And so, again, I feel like it's only my mission that if I am given this privilege, that I need to come back and be able to teach people about it and bring, the information back to people that might not be able to go on those trips, or, from finances to, I don't have any kids myself, but they can't go because they've got their kids. They've got to watch their kids. So they can't go and do this, but they can come and hear this. And, and I always offer to colleagues, like, I'm happy to come and talk to your classes. I've gone to our was it kindergarten last year, a couple years ago on my own with my mom. We went down to Maryland and we did the Harriet Tubman Trail. And it was just a vacation.
Yeah.
But I came back and I was able to go and talk to the first graders. And one of the things they have there is this mural called Take My Hand, and it's by an artist, and I can't remember his name, but it's Harriet Tubman, and she's sort of stepping out of the wall. And what happens is they bring school groups, and her hand is coming out, and so they'll do these group photos of taking her hand. And so we talked to the kids about it, we showed it, and then I worked with my school librarian, and she put the photo up on a green screen, and so the first grade class was able to go and take her hand. And so we did a class photo, and then each kid got to do it. So again, I would say that probably many of them will never go down to the Harriet Tubman
Mhm.
Trail, but
Yeah.
they had this moment where they learned about Harriet Tubman, her story, and then they were able to be in that place too through the medium of the green screen. And I think that's important. And I think, all of these things, a thing that when I come back, sometimes colleagues say, well, I can't teach this stuff, in first grade or kindergarten. And I challenge them and I say, yes, like you can't, I wouldn't teach maybe the level I teach to a ninth grader about the Holocaust, but you can have conversations. You can have conversations about, and specifically with the Holocaust, when I teach the kids, and I'm at a private school, so I'm lucky. I'm not
Mhm.
following, the state guidelines of I only get 3 days to do this, and if I want to spend more time on it, I can. And so we spend a lot of time on the Holocaust, probably about 3 weeks,
Mhm.
um, and not once do I ever show, any of the images of the bodies in the gas chambers because for me, I don't think the kids need to see that. I think
Mhm.
that the way to be teaching the Holocaust is they need to know the information, but they need to understand that these were individuals. And I think, um, hearing their stories, seeing their photos, like it gives it much more. of a chance for the kids to have this empathy because they can see themselves in these moments. And I think that is the same thing with teaching any aspect of history. And like the civil rights, like I think being able to show them, like, here's a photo of a family at a picnic.
Mhm.
What do you see in this? Have you gone on a picnic with your family? Where and now, but then like shifting and being like, but then the next day, I don't do it this way, but like hypothetically, this is the Tulsa Race Massacre. Like, think about that, right? Like, here's one day you're out with your family, and the next day your house is destroyed, all because of the color of your skin. And so those are the things that I think are really important for the kids to see, and again, making those connections, and having those discussions, and not being afraid as teachers. And I know it's really hard being an educator right now. I have many colleagues in other locations across the country who have been called out. I had one colleague that Moms for Liberty, in this was in Seattle, shared his personal address and phone number on, I think it was a radio advertising thing, because he was trying to bring AP African American Studies to his school, and they didn't agree with that. So I know I'm very lucky being in New England, in Massachusetts, where
Yeah.
I can sort of speak a little bit more openly. Um, but I think and this is what a lot of my friends, especially, just another shout out to Common Power, it's like we got to do it, right? We
Mhm.
need to speak up. We need to go and talk in the classroom. We need to go and speak. If the school board is having a discussion over books, we need to be there. We need to be talking about it. We need to be saying why there's value in this. Um, and again, I think that it's scary for people, understandably.
Mhm.
People don't want to lose their jobs. People don't want to be put on probation. People don't want to have, students accuse them of things, because that has happened, unfortunately.
When I started this podcast, I started at our original title 2.5 years ago was Reclaiming Joy in DEI. That was in the last administration. But
Yeah.
there was so much pushback. There were so many companies checking the box of DEI and
Mhm.
not having the heart and spirit of the thing.
Mhm.
And especially after George Floyd,
Yep.
they all got on the bandwagon saying, but look at us, we have this, look at
Right.
us, you can buy from us. And the second that that wasn't required, they dropped it like a hot potato.
Mhm.
And now it has become anathema. It is
Mhm.
the new bad word.
Yeah.
And I've watched colleagues of mine who have started softening preemptively their
Mhm.
messaging, their wording, their whatever. And it didn't work.
Mhm.
Silence doesn't keep you safe, folks.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
didn't work. It's only worse. And now I
Right.
just yesterday talked to somebody who's 35 years in these spaces, and
Mhm.
she not only deals now with her burnout and with her whatever, but the blowback from the organization,
Mhm.
75,000 employees,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Because they're so afraid of getting sued by the
Right.
administration that they
Right.
don't allow that anything they want to do has to go through two separate
Right.
approval committees.
Right.
The red tape is ridiculous.
Yeah.
How do you, I mean, some of this just leaves me speechless.
Yeah.
You talked, one of the stories you gave when you spoke about the Holocaust, and in the face of Holocaust deniers and
Mhm.
all other things today,
Yep.
was about the folks the agents who had their property on the same site as the crematoriums
Mhm.
on the hill, and
Mhm.
about the rich neighbor lady who
Mhm.
wanted them to just tone it down
Mhm.
for.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
tell some of that because it
Yeah.
hit me?
So, we ended up going, it was probably about a 2 week trip, and about 30 educators. And we ended up going to different parts of Austria, Poland, and we actually went to Rome to learn about the role of the Vatican in the Holocaust. But so we were in Austria, and one of the title of our trip was Power of Place. And so we had gone to one of the camps, Mauthausen, and it was sort of this discussion we had about perspective, being a someone who is going to speak out about it, someone who is going to sit back and let it happen, and then the perpetrators who are actually doing it, and then the victims. And we went, and in Mauthausen, it was used as a quarry, a rock quarry, so forced labor. And this woman, and the house is still there, and the family still owns a house, had written in that, it was upsetting for her being in her house, to see the quarry, and like she knew people were being murdered, and but could it maybe not happen as out in the open? And it was this interesting letter because it was given to us first, and so you're sort of like, okay, well, she's speaking out a little bit. She's writing the police officer, so maybe she's toning it down because she's a little scared about, what if the Gestapo get pulled in? So you're trying to rationalize like maybe there's a little good behind it. And then we get another letter that was written from her son that two of the prisoners from Mauthausen had escaped and actually fled to her house. And she, called the police on them and then just said, whatever you do with them, just don't do it in my front yard. But there was no hiding them. There was no, so again, how do you take these different perspectives? And we also did a lot of reading of what was the perspective of someone from the town in Hartheim, which is where they did the euthanasia um, program.
Mhm.
And, someone who worked in the bakery, which is, maybe 50 yards from the killing facility, right during the time of the Nazi program, saying, "Oh, they're not so bad," right? Like they come in, they get their bread. We don't really know what's going on there. But then like 20 years after the war, they're writing and being like, nothing happened. Like we're stepping back. And so it is very easy to see that it is easier sometimes to turn that blind eye when something is going wrong. But I think with that, and I think we're seeing it now, if you turn a blind eye too much, it's going to start coming back on you, right? You're going to eventually, it will impact you. Um, and it could impact you like personally, it could impact a family member, it could, but and I will just say, like, in my opinion, when evil is going on, and if you're not trying to speak up or you're not trying to say things or do things, it will eventually trickle down and impact you. And I think we see that today. I think people saw like with Nazism, I think a lot of people in Germany were sort of like, it's not going to impact us. And then it did start impacting them. To different degrees, from their families being rounded up to the bombing just of the allies that is going to impact them to, individuals who after the war or the economy has been destroyed and now their families are also being impacted. But again, it comes down to that fear, right? Like, do you stand up? Like, how do you stand up to certain things? And it's that intimidation, I think, that is often used um, to make people feel like I can't, like I don't want to, or it's too much, or I don't want to go that far.
Right, right. Well, and I think self-preservation
Mhm.
kicks in, certainly,
Yeah.
and that's biology.
Yep.
That's, everything's a woolly mammoth. And
Yep.
I react to the news scroll some
Hmm.
days. It
Yep.
grabs me and won't let go.
Yep.
And just yesterday something came across, and every once in a while, because people tell me, stay in your lane, don't
Hmm.
do, and if you're using AI to
Hmm.
help with your writing, the
Hmm.
first thing it does is soften
Hmm.
those edges so you don't
Hmm.
offend
Hmm.
anybody.
Hmm.
There is nothing about today's truth
Yeah.
that is not going to offend
Yep.
somebody.
Yep. Yeah.
So you have to learn to feel the fear and do it anyway, which
Yep.
is what you did in Georgia, and
Mhm.
you continue to do as you
Yeah.
travel. Because honestly, we're going to Hawaii in a couple months, and I'm a little nervous about in my white skin with my white hair traveling
Yeah.
across any ocean
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So how do you see this history rhyme applicable in today's world?
I mean, I think it's I as a history teacher, I feel like I'm just seeing it every single day with what what I'm teaching, what I'm doing.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, with our current political climate, I think we are seeing very similar things that we were seeing, in all honesty, with Germany. I know with the inauguration.
Mhm.
We were talking about it, and when I with my Common Power group, and that night was the night that they had basically that rally, and oh, what's his name? The Tesla, drawing a blank on his name
Oh,
now.
Musk.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Making a symbol. And so we were talking about that. We're like, you know, and if any other president had ever done this, it would have like everything would have blown up. It would have been huge. Like, I mean, again, presidents have worn the wrong color suit and it's like front page news. Yet this is happening. It's like, well, it's okay. He didn't mean
Mhm.
it. It wasn't what he was trying to do. Um, and so I see it with that. I see it obviously with what's going on with voter suppression and all of that, and where it's and I tell the kids it's not necessarily the same,
Mhm.
but it's that same commonality, right?
Mhm.
So there is this, yes, it's different people. They might be going about it in a different way, but it is very similar in rhyming of what happened.
Mhm.
And so that's why I say that it rhymes because I think it's similar but slightly different.
Mhm.
And so it is just this constant that I'm like, what is going on? And I never have any, problem having something to teach the kids and talk to the kids about. And it's opened up tons of platforms to have conversations. Um, and, not only talk about America's role in things, but other countries. Like right now in my ninth grade class, we're talking about imperialism. So it's world history. So we're talking about Great Britain, we're talking about, France and Germany and um but we're also talking about like America. Like I think very often take that stance of, we weren't imperialistic. We weren't, and we were. And there's a wonderful book. It's called I can't remember the author. It's called How to Hide an Empire. And it's about, how America, we were an empire, right? We take over Cuba, we take over the Philippines, we take over Hawaii, but it's still always like we still have that complex of like, oh no, but we weren't as bad as Britain, or we weren't as bad as Germany, or we weren't as bad as you. And I mean, we have a genocide of millions of indigenous people in our country. Like we're not indigenous. My family did
Right.
not, I know that we came over from Ellis Island and my mom's side came over way before that, but we did not come from, Turtle Island. We were not from here. And I think you just see all these things in the news. And I think for kids, it's a lot. I think they have their social media. And
Mhm.
so they're seeing what's on TikTok and they're seeing on Snapchat that's not as big now, but they're having these questions and they'll say, well, I saw this. Is that what really happened? And it's like, well, not really. Like this is what happened. And so it's a lot for them to unpack. And so that's why again, I think that we need to be teaching them the history and having and having those conversations. But as educators, we need to be educated. If we're not educated in it, we could get up there and I could, I did make a joke with my kids the other day. I'm like, maybe this whole year's just been a joke and like all this, and they're like, you
Don't you
could, like
wish?
we would have no idea. Like we would have no
I
idea
know, right?
if you
It's
had
in the
made up,
matrix.
and that's what's scary because I think that there are curriculums and state guidelines that are being put into place that are changing the history or taking the history out. And there are going to be gaps. And how can kids make, and I've had my students be like, well, that's not fair for us. How
Exactly.
can we make decisions? How can we make, conscious thought processes on what's going on in the world if we don't have the full picture. And so I think that is something that kids are starting, to question. And I think kids, I've seen many, news reels of kids walking out and kids, standing up. And so that's why, again, when I teach, I talk about the children's movement and the civil rights. I talk about during the Holocaust and World War II, a lot of teenage groups who stood up, the Churchill Club and kids that saw a problem and their different gambits of they're sabotaging to they're making pamphlets to they're just doing walkouts.
Yeah.
But kids can have a bigger voice than I think that they realize. But if they're not given the information or the information in the right way,
Mhm.
it's streamlining their thought process. And I think that a lot of kids are starting to become frustrated with that.
So I'm going to pose a question to you. I've been trying to find somebody who could separate the Israel people from the Israel policies, from the
Mhm,
governance, right? Kind of
mhm,
like we are today.
mhm.
I'm not one of those. I
Yep.
didn't vote for that, right? How do
Yep.
you take the people out of the place?
Yep.
Make that separation. And I was hoping, and I have put out the feelers, and I cannot find a historian who is uh, who stands with Israel and
Mhm,
against what's happening in the Gaza Strip.
mhm. Yeah.
Can you give me any perspective or
I mean, that's a
why? That's huge. And you're and
the,
I'm
the
asking you
Middle East.
because it's 2 years ago and last year and during the election cycle,
Mhm,
it was all over TikTok
mhm,
about, some of what voters were making decisions
mhm.
about.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, but again, I think there's people who are nervous to speak out too much, especially with this.
Right?
But I do think again on the trip that I went last year,
Mhm.
um, the two of the leaders were they are Jewish,
Mhm.
and when we were in Rome was when our administration bombed Iran, the nuclear facilities. And
Mhm.
so we were having this conversation, and now this group is they are definitely blue leaning.
Mhm.
And they actually, while we were also there, and I can't remember the name, the that congresswoman was murdered with her husband, and the senator was shot as well.
Yes.
And they had actually, that congresswoman had gone on, so Power of Place, the group I went with, they take political leaders to Israel, and they do these, and they had actually taken her and her husband on the trip. So my leader, Susie, actually knew her, had gone on a trip with her. So, and I was talking to one of the leaders, and she was like, "It's so difficult because there's such a." She goes, "I don't know." She did say, she's like, "I don't agree with what our administration is doing. I don't agree with the tactics that the Israeli administration is doing, but there's such this deep-seated, um, complicated history in the Middle East
Yeah.
and how things have been set up and I mean, again, like I know Netanyahu, it was the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz, and he didn't go because Poland had charged him with war crimes. So it's this juxtaposition of, and that was conversations that we had of, here Israel and the Jewish people suffered this genocide,
Yeah.
yet where is, and so I do think there is this conflict of like we don't agree with what's going on with the administration, but there has also always been, and maybe I will say this the wrong way, but also always been this huge anti-Semitism felt from this global perspective. And
Mhm.
so it is this like us against them. And so what do we do? And
Mhm.
yes, what's going on in Gaza is wrong, but if we don't maintain control, who's then going to sweep in and do away with us? And
Mhm.
it's a weird, and so they were saying like it's a very hard, because we don't condone what's going on in Gaza,
Right.
but we also know that there are powers in the Middle East, not specifically
Mhm.
Gaza, that are opposed and can be anti-Semitic. And if Israel was also blown off the map, they would be okay with it.
Mhm.
But I think that it's these political, and this is what I talk to the kids about. It's leaders who have power who are making these decisions, and that doesn't mean that the people behind them agree with what's going on. And but they have the seat at the table, they have the power to do what they want. And if they're not listening to what their people are, I mean, we're seeing it now. If they're not listening to the people, it doesn't matter. Like once you gain that power, once you gain, you know, that autocracy, doesn't matter if in my opinion, right now, specifically in America, if every single person walked out on the streets to be like, we don't agree with this, I don't
Mhm.
I don't think it would matter.
Mhm.
And so yeah, it's been a interesting conversation, and like I said, one of them came to speak to my class, and so the kids sort of asked it, and she was like, it's a really hard conversation, right? Or topic to think about. She's like, because I don't agree with what's going on, but I do know that Israel has also had problems. And she goes, and I don't agree with what, Netanyahu is doing. But there is this, she said, sometimes this feeling of like us against them, and how do we handle it? And I, talked to the kids and I said, it's not, and not everyone, yes, like, the, is it Hezbollah? That's the
Yes.
group, right? Hezbollah. Um, but that doesn't mean that everyone in Gaza is in that organization, right? And we have a couple of students right now from Afghanistan. And so we talk about, what is that situation, and with the Taliban, and um there's just such unrest going on, and with the Israel and Gaza situation, I just think it's a powder keg. And
Mhm.
I think what's going on in the Middle East now is a powder keg, but I think it's this deep-seated, and I think a lot of it does connect to colonialism and what decisions were made by, the white savior, in how different countries should get different things, and this should, but without actually talking to the countries, and giving them a voice at the table of, this is what would actually maybe work, or maybe just let us handle ourselves. Like, you don't need to come in and save us. Um,
Well, and colonialism, the word they hate the most is reparations.
mhm,
The part of the idea is burn it down and start over.
mhm,
And the other part is, oh no, we could never afford
mhm,
reparations. So reparations for this unique group, but not that
mhm.
larger group. Or
Yep,
or promised reparations, if you look
yep,
at hidden history, the things they said they were going to give you, the
right.
2 mules and 40 acres that never
Yep, yep,
happened,
yep,
or that got stolen away just like. Yeah.
yep, yeah.
And when I think about what's Israel and policies versus people,
Mhm,
I think about the fact that those things from our ancestors are built into our DNA.
mhm, mhm,
Trauma shifts
mhm,
DNA for
mhm.
generations.
Yeah,
And so what they're experiencing is the head knowledge of, I don't agree with this
mhm,
and I don't agree with that, and the body knowledge that says,
mhm.
but this is an existential crisis for my
Right,
people.
right. And that, again, that, like you said, the generational trauma,
Yeah.
that is felt by, so many different groups. But yeah, I think you mentioned the reparations. Like, I even just also think, um, honestly, when we do land acknowledgements here in America, I was at a conference, and it was being run, I can't remember which nation she was from. It was in Virginia, and she was with Colonial Williamsburg. And they're doing a lot of work down there. And she was like, listen, unless you're going to give us the land back, don't acknowledge it was ours. Right. Like, and she goes, that's
Yeah.
white people trying to make themselves feel better. And
Mhm.
and we were actually at our school kind of coming up with one, and I said, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but there is this thought. And she was saying in this talk, she said there are actually some schools that are like, we know we can't give the land back, right? Like, but do we have some property that we could maybe give back? Or could we say, what tribe lived here? Did they have a certain crop that they grew? Is there something that you can be giving back
Mhm.
without? But she said, anytime you do these, and she's like, and some of them are beautiful and they're wonderful, and she's like, it is nice. And she said, this is actually a debate that indigenous people are having. Like, some indigenous
Mhm.
people are like, no, they should be acknowledging it. And then some are like, again, if you're not giving back the land, are you just making yourself feel better by
Mhm.
saying this belonged to this and this and this? Well, why aren't they anymore? Because, well, we pushed them off the land, or we killed them, or we murdered them, or we moved them to other areas. Um, so I think there is also, like you said, a lot of this with the reparations. We're saying these things, we're doing these things to make us feel better, but then is anyone following through, with it, and doing something about it?
Well, I think my draw to history at this stage of the game is the hidden history. I
Hmm.
had Michelle Sherburne, who's a historian about Vermont and New Hampshire and the Underground Railroad.
Yep.
And and the fact that New Hampshire had no records for 100 years of any slave traffic, slave owners, slave occupation, or anything, it was
Hmm.
very difficult to reconnect those dots. It wasn't until Portsmouth, when
Hmm.
they discovered the trade there and
Yep.
began to unravel that but the rest of it started to happen.
Mhm.
And I was born to tell people secrets. I was born into a family where my mama lied about her age. I was a later in life baby. And the
Yeah.
first thing I would do at 4 years old is race her to the front door so I could say, "You want to know how old my mom is? She's 42."
Yeah.
She was mortified.
Yeah.
And of course, that just made me do
Yeah.
it more, right?
Yeah.
But I really am that person.
Yeah.
I'm always seeing the thing people don't say, and
Mhm.
that's the thing I want to put on the table to talk about.
Yep.
Because the hurt happens in community and the healing happens in community. But when the shame kicks in, or when it's
Mhm.
in your DNA and you don't even know you're carrying shame,
Mhm.
well, my ancestors didn't have slaves.
Mhm.
I didn't have slaves. I'm not responsible.
Mhm.
Yeah, but the trauma of what
Mhm.
your ancestors saw and
Mhm.
survived
Mhm.
is still coming through
Mhm.
in those cautionary tales you don't even know you're carrying
Mhm. Yeah.
into the
Yep.
world today.
Yeah.
What is the name of that common what you were talking about?
So Common Power is the larger group, and you can go on it. They do training. You can go out and help get the vote out. And oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on what you do when you go and try to get people to register to vote for specific
Can't.
people running for office. So Common Power is the like overarching group, and then the Institute for Common Power. And for educators, if educators are watching this, you can apply. They run a couple of trips a year. And for educators, it's completely covered.
Okay.
Institute, you apply for it. It's your flight, it's your hotel, it's everything. Um, they also run trips for non-educators. That is, you do need to pay out of pocket. It's around $2,000. But if you are someone that has ever thought of doing a civil rights trip and going on and learning, it is something that I was lucky to get for free. And I think that's wonderful. They do that for educators, but I would pay over and over again for the experience I had, and for the learning, because they also, besides Dr. Scott being a phenomenal historian, they also get you to meet people. So you get to meet foot soldiers, you get to have conversations, you get to, learn, at the feet of heroes. And so it's a great organization. They have a book club, they have all sorts of things, and resources for people, and then also specifically educators.
Mhm. Just this last year, my husband and I went to Gettysburg for the first time, and it was after we had seen you in the
Yeah,
power place.
yeah,
I must be an empath or something
yeah,
because, man, just being on the ground shifted for
yep,
me, and I could only do it in short
yeah,
pieces,
yeah,
right?
yep,
One day is good. We're going to go
yeah,
back again this year
yeah,
and give it another go.
yeah.
But the the ground holds trauma.
Hmm.
The stories.
Hmm.
You can read a book all you want,
Yeah,
but read the book in the place and see what happens
right.
because it shifts.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep. And that's at my school, we actually take the eighth grade to Gettysburg. And so I'll be taking eighth grade this coming year down there. And
Mm,
um, there is a difference where again they're learning about it, but now they're going and they're standing in those spaces. And again, I think it's so important. That anyone has the ability, and I would say to people who can't always travel, and um I know is difficult, but do research into your local history, and there's always something there. I'm in historic Deerfield, and they started this a couple years ago. It's called the Witness Stone Project, and I grew up in Deerfield as well. My parents were dorm parents here, and I must have walked down Main Street now hundreds of times. When I was a child in the 80s and 90s, they never talked about the enslaved people of Deerfield. I
yeah.
come back and now they're starting to, and probably between the 1700s, 16 up until the early 1800s, they're now thinking that there probably would have been around, and we're a small town, maybe around 60 to 70 enslaved people residing in the town. And so they're putting markers. It's actually connected to the stones that you see sometimes in Europe for the Holocaust.
Mhm.
But they're giving voice to, and if they weren't in the house, it's the site, it's the property. And this was all actually started by a teacher and his students in Connecticut,
Mhm.
who started doing this research of this idea of like New England didn't have slavery. We weren't as bad as the South. And we did, and they started this project, and now sort it's kind of grown throughout New England, where towns and schools and all of that are starting to register and give voice to, the enslaved people in New England.
I think our history in the next round is going to go back to, it's like going back to analog, is going to go back to oral history.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
things that can't be erased, the things your grandmother told you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Is there anything else as we're wrapping up here?
I,
Anything else that you like your sixth grade old women to know?
I don't, I mean, again, I just think that there's so much out there. And I think history can be scary for people. Again, just not only the topics sometimes can be a lot, but it can be intimidating. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I can't read a history book. It's going to be boring. It's going to be, I'm not a historian, so I don't understand it. And there are so many resources and things out there for people to dive into, to find the topics that mean something to you and go in full force. I also, as a teacher, there are so many wonderful young adult and middle school. I'm a staunch believer in my students reading historical novels because I think that's sort of like a gateway to reading history, right? Like there is some fact behind it, but also, maybe there's some adventure and some liberty taken. But there are so many phenomenal middle school, young adult books out there that are both fiction and nonfiction. Again, just take a look what's around you. If you're in the New England area and you want to learn more about New England slavery, you've got Deerfield. There is actually a plantation in Somerville, Mass. I think it's outside of Albany. They have another New England plantation, and so you can go and learn about the lives of the enslaved there. Indigenous culture and history. You have so many things in the area that you can go and see, and so yes, it's always wonderful to go far away and get on a plane or drive a couple hours, but there's so much local stuff that you can find around you if you just look. And there's so many resources now with Zoom and webinars to just dive in. And I think people who are again nervous will find that they're going to be welcomed and they're going to, that's the one thing. Keep going back to common power. Dr. Terry's always like, we're all at different stages of our learning, but that doesn't mean that you're, less than me as, her having her PhD and this historian who teaches as a professor. She's like, there are things I'm learning that someone who's never done this might know more than me about. And so I think just embracing it and the more you can learn, um, I think the better you're gonna feel about things.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Even if it's just um, the rest of the story. That's what
Mhm.
I call part of what I write on Substack, the rest
Yeah.
of the story.
Yeah.
Because the only story that matters is the one I tell myself. And if I
Yeah.
don't have all the history, then the
Mhm.
story I'm telling myself has gaping holes that you're not going to get with your master's degree that I
Yep.
had
Yep.
and said,
Yep.
how did I never know about Juneteenth? How did
Yep.
that happen?
Yep. Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
I know how it happened
Yeah.
by design.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Yeah.